And we're live. Okay. So I sort of felt all the time in academia that this a bit more human side is a bit missing there. Yeah? Whenever you look through CVs of people you're working with, or your colleagues, or your collaborators, it's really like all the formal stuff, all the education, the awards, the accolades, and all that. Uh, which of course is important for the bottom line. Why to bring the collaboration or whatever further. But um, that's why I thought it might be useful and interesting for either your colleagues or aspiring researchers to learn a bit more about the person himself, his motivations, and so on. So I would start with quite a broad question, and that would be if you could share a bit about your early life.
Absolutely. So, well, I'm originally from Tarragona, Spain. This is 1 hour south from Barcelona. That's where I was born, and I spent, I would say, my time between this city and a small town closer to the mountains called Ascó. And that's how I grew up, right? I mean, a very normal kid going to school, going to after school activities, having a lot of friends, and enjoying life. I know that today, for example, here in the US, I look at what some of our students do, and by the time they get to college, they have already done so many things. Well, by the time I got to college, my summers had been enjoying life with my friends. So, that was it about. Then I went to Barcelona for college. I studied telecommunications engineering at the Universitat Politècnica de Catalunya. That's in Barcelona itself. And during many years, I mean, we know that within Europe, there are all the Erasmus programs and mobility programs. And the reality is that I was never really interested into those. I was, happy staying in Barcelona, spending the weekends and the summers back in my hometown. And that was about it. What happened is that at the time, it was when in Spain they are trying to transition from 5-year programs, which is what I took, into the more European type of 4-year programs. And well, I was in a 5-year program. I could not just cut it short and make it 4. So what they offered to some of us is like, look, you can spend a total of 6 years with us, and you'll get both your degree and your master's degree. So that sounded interesting, and I said, let's think of that. Let's do that, actually. But one requirement was that during the last year, what would be the 6th year, we had to be abroad, because this was supposed to be an international program. So together with another classmate, we ended up coming to Boston, but to MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And that was not the first time that I did research, because I was already an undergraduate researcher in Barcelona with the Antennas Lab. But it was the first time that I see how exciting things could be when it comes to research. And as someone who never really planned to be far from his city or far from his town, I realized that the opportunities were on this side of the Atlantic. And from there is when everything that, you can read in my bio started, which is, I decided to stay in this side of the US, went for Ph.D. to Georgia Tech, and then decided that I wanted to stay in academia in the US. And that has been the transition. Yeah. So I would say, from someone who said, my parents were surprised when I told them that I was planning to go to the US to finish my degree. I said, wow, you never moved from your hometown, right? What are you going to do? And the reality is I moved to the US, and then I decided to never move from here, right? So to some extent, I'm not moving much, right? But I just had one transition.
Right. And it was a good one, obviously. But I would guess that you became interested in physics and engineering way before that exchange time. So how did that happen?
So yes, what I would say is that that makes me think, right? When did I discover what I like? So first of all, I studied telecommunications engineering because at the time, let's travel in time, right? This was 2002 when I started my bachelor's degree or telecommunications engineering degree in Barcelona. And at that time, telecommunications was the degree that, if you were good, you would try to go to that, right? Because they were supposed to open the doors to the most exciting opportunities. I mean, just think in the last 20, 21 years, what has changed in our life, right? We have seen the cell phone revolution, right? We went from just clamshells to actual smart devices. We added tablets, we added wearables, we added everything. We added connectivity everywhere. So in 2002, which was the beginning, or I would say, you could tell that something big was coming, and I wanted to be part of that, right? I didn't want just to be a user of technologies or an early adopter and just write, blog posts about it. I actually wanted to contribute to the design of those things. And these are actually the words that I remember I wrote when I was when I was writing my application statements, not just to get into the bachelor's program, but later on to get some of the scholarships that I had to be able to come to the US. And through the years, so in telecommunications engineering, I realized that what I liked the most were the things that were closer to physics. And to physics, I mean the electronics, the electromagnetism. Of course, we could add comms theory to it, we could add networking theory, but it was the things closer to the physics. And actually, that's what happened. If you look at what my PhD is, and again, the PhD came some years after that, right? But the title of my dissertation was Fundamentals of Electromagnetic Nano Networks in the Terahertz Band. And I would say the first 2-3 chapters are fully physics. We're talking about new materials to develop new antennas. We're talking about the interaction of electromagnetic radiation with different type of elements in the air or in buildings or anywhere. And that was always a connection to physics. And if you ask me, right, am I happy with my engineering degree? My answer is absolutely. If I had to study anything else, probably would have been physics, but I still prefer engineering because I think that engineering is what connects physics to reality, to an actual societal application. And that's what I try to also tell my students, right? It's great to have huge discoveries and to write papers in Nature and Science and this and that. But if we cannot connect them to society, what's the point of it? Sure, it's just to boost your ego, but how can you improve the society we live in? So I think that engineering is that sweet spot that connects physics with society, and that's what I like.
Right. Yes, that's true. Actually, one can make a notable dent actually only when it starts benefiting others, not just the self-serving system in any way. So would you say that there was not like let's say a clear point or an event in your life where you were like, oh, okay, physics and engineering, that's something I want to do? Or was it more like a gradual, okay, as you mentioned already, that you arrived at that spot?
I know where you're going, and I can tell that I had friends who always knew what they wanted to be, and they went with it. And they went for it. In my case, I know that this sounds not typical, but I actually usually went with the flow. So I'm telling you, I started telecommunications engineering just because I see that something could happen, and because it was a degree that was fairly popular and supposed to open many doors. When I started college, I never thought that I would go into graduate school. I never thought I would have a master's, yet alone a PhD. But then, okay, this opportunity came that, look, instead of a 5-year-long degree and just end up with that, with 1 extra year, you get your master's. Okay, let's do that. Then when I was in my 4th year, after taking the courses on microwave and particular on antennas, there was this professor, Josep Jornet, in UPC in Barcelona, who was one of the key contributors to the Barcelona Antennas Lab, who reached out to some of us who did quite well in his class. And he said, look, I'm interested in, have undergraduate researchers with us, so why don't you work with me? So again, he talked to a couple of us, we brought a couple of our friends, and suddenly it was 4 of us who were working with him. And my very first work was actually on antennas, on ultra-wideband antennas. This was 2005, 2006. Ultra-wideband is a technology that was already academically popular at the time, military popular some years more, commercially popular only the last few years. Ultra-wideband is what you have behind many of the indoor localization systems in your favorite phones. So we were in 2005, 2006, already working on this as a student. So that was very exciting. So yes, the first one who brought me into research was Professor Josep Jornet. Then well, when the opportunity to come to the US appeared, it's interesting because at the end, we were able to go to MIT because who was the director of the telecommunications school in Barcelona had done her PhD with this other professor, Professor Milica Stojanovic, both at the time at Northeastern University. And now you will see, actually, that's where I am now. So the director of the School of Telecommunications Engineering in Barcelona with this Professor Milica Stojanovic, who at the time was at MIT, they had this connection. And that's the way how, two students from Barcelona could access the most prestigious engineering institute in the world. And it was, again, personal connection. So that's how we came to Boston with my friend Patri. And in that case, we were working on something different. In that case, it was underwater acoustic networks. Still related to physics, but not the physics of electromagnetism, but the physics of mechanical waves or acoustic waves. And quite different, I must say. But I guess that the change when I was here in the US is that I realized that here there are indeed many opportunities for research. Research is something that is well valued. Having a PhD is something that in the US still gives you, it's a required step depending on the positions you want to reach, as opposed to maybe in Spain at the time in which, you would only do your PhD if you wanted to go to academia. And at that time, I didn't know if I wanted to go to academia or not, right? I just knew that, I wanted to go on doing research. And if that meant PhD, okay, there we go for a PhD. Then, of course, this program at MIT finished. So I went back to Spain. And during that summer, this was the summer of 2007, some of my professors in Barcelona told me, Josep, look, we know you're done and we know that you're looking at options. Why don't you join this summer school that we are offering here in Barcelona? There is going to be this very accomplished and actually famous professor, Professor Ian Akildith, who is going to be teaching cognitive radio networks. Okay, fine. And, it may be good that you see other topics before, you decide what you want to do in the future. So I went to the summer school. This was for 3 weeks in Barcelona. And, well, indeed, the very first day, Professor Akildis asked each of us to introduce ourselves. We were a small group, maybe 20 people. So we went through the classroom and he asked us to introduce ourselves. And when it came to me, I said, okay, I just, Josep Jornet, I just completed my master thesis at MIT with Professor Stojanovic. And he asked me, oh, does she still smoke so much? I said, yes, I assume you know her. And she's like, of course I know her. She's a good friend, this and that. Okay, it ended up like that. And after a few days, he calls me. I mean, actually, one of my professors in Barcelona says, look, you may want to talk to him. So I talked to him, not in the class, but in his office, the Professor Akildis. And he says, look, I talked to your professors in Barcelona. I talked to Professor Stojanovic at MIT. I know that you're in the market looking for options. So I'm just going to give you one more option on your table. And that option would be for you to start your PhD with me at Georgia Tech. But forget about underwater acoustic networks, forget about cognitive radio networks. It's going to be on a totally different topic in which I'm starting, which is called nano communication networks or nano networks. And I'm like, what's this topic, right? Say, look, the first student who did her master thesis on this is going to defend her thesis in a couple of weeks. Come to her defense and see if you like what you see. So we did that, and I went to her defense, and that was a totally different topic, right? At that time, nano communication networks meant networks of cells-like type of devices, so living cells in your body, and therefore communicating not with electromagnetic signals or acoustic signals, but communicating by exchanging molecules, so molecular communications. That was totally different. I mean, again, this was something that people had not been working on. And there were so many ideas in this girl's, her name was Christina's, in Christina's master thesis that's like, wow, this is something, right? Of course, he threw in that he had an affiliation with Barcelona, so there could be an possibility to spend the summers also in Barcelona. So you start adding things, right? There is the opportunity for me to join Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech, the ECE, the Electrical and Computer Engineering program, it's at the time was top 5 in the country, in the US. So one of the best engineering school, working on a very exciting topic with someone who has some of the highest impacts that you can see in research when it comes to pioneering work, very high number of citations, recognitions. So the opportunity to work with him. And in addition, even the opportunity to spend the summers in Barcelona. So, hey, that all together sounds very nicely. And I guess that eventually I said, okay, yes, I'll do this. And that's honestly how I moved to Georgia Tech and how things happen. And if you ask me for a turning point, I think that was a turning point in my life, deciding that I would, okay, go for it, go do a PhD on in a very advanced group on a very crazy topic, and committing myself for several years. So that was the turning point. Of course, when I joined the group and, we started redefining the topic, we realized that, yes, there was molecular communications, and one of a new PhD student in the group, another one, was already working on that. So my advisor, Professor Akildi, said, Josep, every PhD student should have a clear path, right? So I don't want you to work on the same that another PhD student is working already. So we'll have to refine this. Go and take these courses on nanoelectronics, molecular electronics, carbon electronics, and try to see if we can find something there. And that's how eventually the topic that, became my thesis and my main research work, terahertz communication, was born. That's honestly the turning point. Also, once I joined the group, he was very persuasive at showing us that, if we want to continue to be research at the forefront and free to some extent, being in academia was the best thing we could do. And that's why very quickly I realized that, look, I'm doing a PhD and I want to continue in academia. So that's what happened.
I see. So, okay. Yeah, that was quite a good, exhaustive message. But yeah, you said you went with the flow. I guess that's the gist of your journey, basically, so far, even. And so, on the other hand, then were there some mentors, friends, or peers that have like strongly influenced you in your life direction or work direction, regardless of which one?
Yeah, so I already mentioned this student who was already working on molecular communications at Georgia Tech in the same group. This is now Professor Massimiliano Pierobon, and to do a PhD in a very advanced topic in an intense field where competition is everything, you need to have good support. And I always say that, I survived my PhD, or I excelled in my PhD, because I had a support network, not just the advisor, but the other lab members. And in this case, Massimiliano, he became a very close friend and someone who we relied on each other, right? And this is true with him and others. And that's a message that I always want to say. You don't do your PhD alone. You don't, several things. First, you work with your advisor, not for your advisor or under an advisor. Now, as a faculty, I get many emails from students that says, I would like to work under you. So what do you mean under you? Like I'm sitting on top? That's not how research works, right? So you need an advisor that works with you, and that's what I had. And then you need a support network. When you're abroad, when your family is not around, the next level, your friends become your family. And that's important, that you pick right who your friends are. And honestly, now it's been 10 years since I graduated from Georgia Tech with a PhD. And there is still 5-6 of us that, we keep our WhatsApp group, and pretty much every week there is something going on. And we all took different paths. Some of us stayed in academia, some others went to industry, but that connection is there. And we time to time, we may meet at conferences, we may meet. In the last 5 years, I guess we pretty much met often for weddings and things like that. But again, those are friends with whom, they have played a very important role at a time that you need it, to be at the forefront of a field, working intensively, making your work the whole thing you do every day. You need that support network, and those people will stay with you forever. That's the nice thing.
Right. So another question, much broader, it would be, what does it mean to be successful in life for you? And not just professionally, just generally,
Very good question. What I would say first is that the goal should be, to be successful means to find that thing that makes you happy and go for it, right? in my case, the reality is that I like my research. I like proving things that people thought that they were not possible. I like discovering things that I didn't know they existed, or maybe no one knew that they existed. And that's something that makes me happy. And that's, I think that's what I'm looking for. Of course, the goal, however, should be not that just you do something and you keep it for yourself. No, the goal is that you do something, you share it, and you see that people share the excitement with you or appreciate the work that you do. I guess that's probably the broader definition of success, right? It's people say, no, as long as you're happy with yourself, that's fine. Sure, but I think that we need to be a little bit beyond this very centric vision of life. I think that the moment that what you're doing has an impact, and an impact could be creating a new area of research, or impact could be enabling new directions, or impact could be creating products that everyone buys, right? So I guess that success means having that impact, and that impact hopefully comes by doing what you like. That's what I would say.
Right.
Of course. Yeah, go ahead.
So what would you, I guess, trying to say is that, it's not only about the happiness, to find the happiness in what you're doing, but also that there is a meaning behind it for others, not just yourself.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. So, what do you consider the greatest learning moments in your life, if you can think of any?
The greatest, sorry?
Learning moments, maybe a moment when things didn't go as you planned, or something went wrong, or something unexpected happened and that changed the course of your life.
Well, so as I would say, let's be very honest. No, starting in January 2009 at Georgia Tech, supposed to be working on nano communication networks, looking at molecular communications, and reaching the lab, I'm finding that there is someone already working on this topic, and that somehow I need to be exploring another topic. Was like, okay, I thought I was going to work on this. Now I'm actually going to be working on something else, right? That was not the nicest feeling. I mean, it was exciting, right? Because again, look, as a PhD student, the whole point is to explore and to learn, and eventually to create knowledge. So that was fun. Okay, but the first step that we need to create is the topic that we were going to work on. I think that what was interesting is that, as I mentioned, so my advisor said, Josep, look, you can take more courses on communications, but why don't you go and take courses outside what your comfort zone are, right? And that's why, for example, I was taking this course on carbon and molecular nanoelectronics. Again, small course, taught at Georgia Tech. The first day, maybe we're 14 people in class, and the professor asked us to introduce ourselves. Everyone in that course were from the realms of nanoelectronics, nanophotonics, mechanical engineering, and say, what's your background? I say, well, I'm a communications person, telecommunications guy. And the instructor says, why are you here? And I said, well, my advisor told me so. So, that's why I'm here. But what was interesting is that the professor who was teaching this class, Professor Azad Naemi, who is still at Georgia Tech, he was doing himself research on graphene for wired interconnects. And in that course, we mostly learned quantum physics and, quantum nanoelectronics. This was 2009. And this class we had to prepare a final project. And for that project, what happened is the following. Say, look, I'm a wireless communications person. My final goal is to have a very small radio that can be used in those nano communication devices. And the very first element, or the critical element from a radio to make it wireless, is that you need an antenna. So as part of this course, I tried to see if I could combine what I was learning from quantum nanoelectronics and the properties of graphene with what I knew and I had learned from Barcelona when I was an undergraduate researcher in the antennas lab. So could we make an antenna with this new material and make it very small and see if it works as it's supposed to work? And well, what happened was the following, right? Said, okay, the goal is clear. We want to make an antenna that maybe it's just 1 micrometer in the largest dimension. And we know that there are some challenges if we use traditional materials. So why don't we try with this new material that people are talking about? This was, again, 2009, and I repeat the date because graphene was first obtained experimentally in 2004. So 2009 meant that this was still an early material. So, well, as part of that class project, we combined electromagnetics equations with some electronic equations to describe this material. And eventually it came out that yes, we could make an antenna, but that antenna would work well at terahertz frequencies. Of course, this was, I had the class, but then I had my research progress with meetings with my advisor. And, it came to some point that says, okay, well, this seems to make sense. So I guess that is it. What we're going to say is that nano communication networks can be based on molecular communications following the biology path, or can be based on electromagnetic systems, but not at your typical microwave or even optical frequencies, but right in the middle, terahertz frequencies. And honestly, that was the kickoff, I would say, for my PhD and for everything else that has happened through the years. Just as another note, it was 2010 when when Andrei Geim and Konstantin Novoselov got the Nobel Prize for obtaining graphene experimentally and characterizing it for the first time. So by the end of 2010, many groups started working on graphene and its applications. Our advantage is that we have been doing that since 2009 and for a very specific application, wireless communications. So I would say that was one first moment, like that's really what set the beginning of my PhD. And many times when I have students that join my group and they say, oh, what are we going to work on? Oh, I want something specific. And I say, look, if the first day of your PhD, I tell you exactly what you're going to work on, I might be losing options. I might be eliminating paths that from the environment, your creativity or what happens, you may miss. So I end up telling the students, do not rush in narrowing down your topic and deciding what you want to do. Don't expect me to tell you, because again, it's part of a learning process. And if I already knew what you're going to do for the next 4 years, probably it's not exciting enough. So I guess that was the big aha moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's what you're saying about, giving the students the space to basically figure out for themselves what will be their topics of interest. That's quite interesting because today's world, and academia is not an exception to it, pushes you to do things quickly and be productive and specific and all that, right? So it's actually quite contrary to what you're trying to do. So how is that working out for you? Yeah.
So I know what you mean. So yes, we're not supposed to, but very often we are evaluated based on how many publications per year we get out, how many grants we get in. And of course, this is one thing. On the other hand, I'm telling my students, take as much as you need to come up with something. I agree, it seems contradictory. But what ends up happening is that, first of all, in a group, we end up stacking students, right? When I started as an assistant professor, so let's move from being a student to being an assistant professor. When I started at the University at Buffalo as an assistant professor, I was given some good advices. Again, by my advisors, first step was, Josep, now you're going to become an assistant professor. You're going to be an independent faculty. Many people will want to work with you, but remember, at the end of the day, your day has 24 hours. You cannot just go crazy and say yes to everyone. You will have to, accept to work only with people that you really want to work with. You cannot just work with everyone. So that was one thing. The other advice that I got from other colleagues is do not rush hiring students. A very good first PhD student will make your tenure process very smooth. Not good first PhD student will make your tenure track very hard, and perhaps you may not succeed. So with that in mind, what happens is that when you start as assistant professor, you still do a lot of the work yourself, right? You cannot just think that you're going to hire top stars and they are going to work with you. No, you are the last person in the list of a department. The only people who want to work with you are people who didn't get accepted by other faculty, or, well, maybe they really like your topic, but let's be honest, right? When you join a department and you start getting emails, I'm your dream professor. Guys, I've been a professor for 1 week. I defended my thesis last week. How can I be your dream professor? So, you're careful. So what I did from the beginning was this, knowing that I still need to continue doing most of my research myself, let's just start testing students. And it was always the same. So what I tell students is the following. first, do not rush the beginning, right? Do not rush into try to narrowing down what you want to do, or try to work. I mean, try to explore, try to learn. It's the most beautiful part of research is the discovery, is reading, having that. And sometimes the students feel like they are wasting their time. And I tell them, no, by the time that you have a topic, by the time that you're writing papers right and left, you will miss the quality time, the freedom of just going and reading, right? So that's one thing. There was also something interesting, which is, so this is another professor from UPC, Professor Eduardo Alarcón, who, once told me, say, look, at the end of the day, every time that you read a paper, or maybe you think it's not connected, but every time that you read a paper, you create a bubble of knowledge. Then you read another paper, another bubble. Then you need another paper, another bubble, right? Reading, it's creating knowledge. The process of doing research is learning how to connect that knowledge. And I think that was a very good thing to say. And that's what I've been telling the students. Read, take your time, and try to create knowledge. Then we'll see how we connect it. And eventually you'll be able to connect it. And it takes time. Yes, I agree. In full disclosure, I would say the following. This is how I approach PhD students, because a PhD is a long process and there is no point in rushing things. Honestly, once you create many bubbles of knowledge and you learn to connect them, the ideas will come, the publications will come. I would say that I approach master students slightly different. Master students usually come to you with a very strict timeline. I have 1 year left in the department. I need to get my master thesis in 1 year. So when I approach master students, what we try to do is assign to them a project for which we already have the problem and we even know where the solution should be. So mostly I think of a master student as someone who can help me or help another PhD student get something for which we already know the question and we know the answer, implement that, right? That's a master student. Because they have a very strict timeline. So yes, master students are different from PhD students in the way we think. The other way that I always tell is like, look, if you're a master student, I will give you the first problem and I'll point you to the solution. Your help is to bridge the two. Fine. If you decide to stay for a PhD student, most likely I'll just give you a problem, and you will have to go and find the solution. If you become good, what will happen is by the time you come to me with the solution, you will tell me, you know what, this solved this, but this is the next problem that I want to solve, and this is how I'm going to solve it. At the moment that a student can identify the problem and identify the answer, they have become independent researchers. They don't need me anymore. They don't need an advisor. That's when they graduate. So that's the different stages that we go through in the lab, I guess.
That sounds like a very sensible and nice way to do this, actually, to lead students, and especially from their side, right? Because the stories of the PhD students burning out are piling all the time. So, and it's become very obvious why. So it's quite great, actually, to see that someone really does the right thing.
I mean, eventually, believe me, they will get very busy, but they will get very busy because they are the ones who see, I want to do that and get a paper. I want to do that and get another paper. And I want to come over the weekend to test that. Sure, I'm not going to stop you, but it should never be by me pushing them. At most, it should be by me encouraging them. So sometimes joking with some other friends, other faculty, it's like I feel like a cheerleader, meaning I'm not here to yell people. I'm here to cheer people and tell them, look, let's do this, right? And you want to do it, I'm going to help you and I'm going to make sure it happens. And again, students get busy, very busy, but not because I'm pushing them, but because they see what they can get.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like generally, anyway, the positive reinforcement tends to work better than the negative one, right? So in the long run, anyway, right? I mean, okay. So next question: outside work, what do you enjoy doing to unwind and recharge?
Very good question. So I actually enjoy cooking and correspondingly eating. So that's one of the the things that happen, which is like when I moved to the US, the first few months I was super excited to try so many different types of foods. I mean, when you think of US food, there are some American foods, like sure, big burgers and other things, but mostly, being in Boston, you could try food from anywhere in the world, and I was not used to it, right? So that was very exciting. But after 3-4 months, I realized that I started to miss the type of food that my mom would prepare. So at that moment, it's when I start, okay, mom, I need recipes. And I started trying and cooking something, and actually people around me seemed to like it. So that was again the positive reinforcement. So at that time, I said, hey, maybe that's something I want to do. So, I would say my free time was usually cooking and hosting friends, and that was fine. I'll give you an anecdote. So when I joined Georgia Tech, again, during the first semester, during the first year, we're supposed to pass the qualifying exam, right? To see if we're qualified to do the PhD. The day before the exam, I was tired of studying and checking things. So actually, I decided to cook for the lab. So the day before my qualifying exam, I cooked some typical Catalan pastry for the period. It was the Easter period, so we had some specific fried dough. And I prepared those for the lab. I invited
Churros.
everyone. Yes. Sorry? Yeah.
Was it churros?
Similar to churros, but instead of being long,
Okay.
they are balls. But yeah, it's a similar concept. Yes. So I cooked that for the lab, and people came over, and we had a good time. The next day, I had the exam, and it's really funny because after a month or so, I get an email from the school at Georgia Tech saying, congratulations, you got the highest score in the qualifying exam in this year, so we're giving you an award. I said, wow, okay. So again, positive reinforcement. Cooking, it's a good therapy. And some of my friends actually told me that. I said, Josep, you don't realize, but you use cooking as your therapy, as your relaxation scheme, and that was true, right? I think that cooking it's fun. It allows you to be creative too. Like, of course, I look at recipes, but I tend to not go and measure exactly what you put in the recipe. I tend to say, sure, this is how it feels right? So you end up doing that. And I continue doing that forever. And still today, I have many friends over. So that's one of the things. There is another thing that I do in my free time, and my students know, because when I'm in my office, either I'm working, or if I need a break, I would most likely just open my favorite cars blogs or YouTubers that work on cars, and that's the second thing I like. I really like cars. Unfortunately, as a faculty, I cannot buy the cars that I would like to buy, but hey, I'm still
Really?
well, let's say that I like some very exclusive sports cars, but that's okay. I still will drive my reliable Japanese car to go to the office. Or here in Boston, I actually take the train. Here in Boston, it doesn't make sense to try to drive in the city.
Yeah.
Honestly, there is public transportation system that works to some extent. So that's the other thing. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting that you mentioned that being in academia, you cannot buy the cars you want. And is that just because it's not paid well enough, or why?
Well, so what I would say is the following, right? If I look at the starting, let's just make a comparison. The starting salary of the students who graduate with a PhD from my group today, who go to industry, it's probably comparable to the salary that I have today after 10 years of working in academia. So starting salary in industry with a PhD, it's easily twice the salary of a faculty in academia, right? So if you want to be rich, probably going to academia is not the path, unless you see academia as a path to create intellectual property and eventually converted that intellectual property into patents, and then go through the startup path, which many of my colleagues do, or go through, well, maybe licensing deals or this and that. But as a traditional faculty who does research, who teaches, your friends in industry will make much more money, and that's okay. The good side, the good news of the story is that, well, in academia, at least for now, we still keep tenure, right? So we know that unless we do something terribly wrong, we are the ones who decide how much we want to rev up the engine every year or not, right? Nothing will happen. In industry, you know that independently of what you do, you go with the market. And the market may change, and the market may mean that suddenly you're 40 and you may lose your job and you need to start from scratch somewhere else. So that's what I would say. But just in case there is, a very interesting person or generous donor there, All my students know that you were surprised of the cars I like. Well, if you ask me what car would I buy today, well, probably a Lamborghini would tick the right boxes, right? I just make sure that all my students know, in case one of them becomes rich, right? Then they can think of the bill of ladder. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good strategy for sure. So, are you spiritual in any way? And if not, what are your, let's say, life's bigger picture beliefs?
Sorry, I missed the first part of your question.
That if you are spiritual in any way, and if not, what are your life's bigger picture beliefs?
Yeah, so I am. I mean, I'm a spiritual. Actually, so in Spain, I was raised Catholic, and I mean, I still try to go to church on Sundays. And again, some other secrets of my personal life. When I was in Spain, right, when I was still there, I used to play the pipe organ in the church during the mass on Sundays. That's some things that, again, I never went to the conservatory. I never went to music school. It was that most of my friends could learn how to play the guitar. My sister played the guitar, so the acoustic Spanish guitar, right, in the church. But I was never interested with that. So the person who was playing the organ in the church said, "Josep, do you want to learn this?" I said, "Well, maybe." So he gave me a book and a few lessons, and from there, I'm no star by no means, but good enough to actually provide the base for the guitars to shine and the voices to shine. I think of the organ as a very powerful, deep instrument that sustains everything, and then on top you do all the things you want. So that's one of the things. I can tell you a question that I was asked many times, especially when I was younger. Now today I think people have changed a little bit, but one question that I got asked many times when I was still in Spain is like, how come someone so smart can believe in God? And I'm like, well, that's something that happens, right? And that's the whole point of faith, right? So yeah, that's how I feel. That's how we are at home, and that's what I am. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And what does the balance between work, family, friends, and hobbies mean in your case?
Very good question. Balance, that's the word.
But don't take it too seriously. It's okay.
No. So what I would say is that first, I like my work, right? And I used to tell some of my friends, the research I do is like eating ice cream. I know that I like eating ice cream, and I know that eating ice cream all the time is not good. It's not healthy. So I try not to eat ice cream all the time. But that's how I feel with research. I like my research, and I don't mind doing it most of the time. I know that by doing research all the time, I might be missing other things. And I would say that for a while, that was the case, right? I mean, when I was a Ph.D. student, my work would be just, to do research, maybe go to the gym every now and then and cook for the friends and then repeat, right? That was the plan. Then I found who is now my wife, and, it was always good. She was very generous with the time, and it's like, look, we understand that when there is a deadline, it means that, maybe the day before a deadline, you don't get to sleep much or you don't get to sleep at all. But the beautiful thing of being in academia is that, well, maybe you have a deadline next week, so you're busy, but after that, you may have some freedom, right? And you may have the opportunity to travel, and you may have this. So what I would say is I try to find balance, but balance doesn't mean that every day I have this many hours of work and this many hours of leisure. It means that there are days in which it's only work, and it also means that there are days that there is only leisure. And now that we have a bigger family with a kid and this and that, honestly, I'm actually, okay, I shouldn't say that, but if the kid, our daughter goes to daycare. If she's sick, she cannot go to daycare. And at the beginning, I thought, oh my God, the days that she cannot go to daycare, I cannot work. But I immediately realized that no, if she cannot go to daycare, it's great. I cannot work, meaning I have a very funded excuse to actually be able to cancel some of the meetings and spend time with her. So that's good, right? It's a good reason to not work and still not feel guilty. And it's not that I feel guilty because someone is pushing me. No, I sometimes I feel guilty because it's myself pushing, right? It's self-driven.
Yeah, I would dare to say for most of the people, it's actually the case too, that it's ourselves who are creating that pressure, to succeed
Yes.
and to keep going and do everything all the time and be productive all the time, whatever,
Yes.
for the lack of better word, let's say.
Yeah, I think we put on us too much pressure sometimes. Honestly, that's what it is.
Okay, so now I would pivot a little bit to, okay, these were questions more about your personal journey, let's say. So now I'll have questions more focused on the work, and sometimes they'll be similar, but oftentimes also very different. So first, what does it mean to be successful at work for you? Like, where do you see yourself? When you arrive there, you'll be like, okay, now I reached what I wanted in my professional life.
Okay. So, well, I guess that, as I mentioned, I graduated from Georgia Tech 10 years ago. In the last 10 years, I've been on a tenure track. I was at the University at Buffalo. I got my tenure early, so actually in the 5th year. Then I moved to Northeastern, where I am now. In 3 years, I was, suggested to go up for promotion. So in 10 years, I've been from being a student, PhD student, to being a full professor. That has been quite a trip. And first of all, I never worked thinking that, I need to work for my next promotion. No, I work because I like my work and because I want it to have an impact. But in the process, you realize that these things happen, right? And you get promoted, and that's great. You get some awards. Some of them are internal, some of them are external. Like last year, there were a few awards that were still within the young researcher category. And this was interesting because you say, well, if you're a full professor, how can you be a young researcher? Well, many definitions of young researcher is up to 10 years after your PhD. Well, that's what I was, right? So I guess that everything happened very quickly, but because everything, was just lined up. I want to say one thing, which is like, not many people can get to jump into an assistant professor position right after the PhD without a postdoc, right? And I was able to do that because, again, my advisor provided us very, very good training. Like, he would help. I mean, he would ask us to help preparing proposals, which was a way for us to learn how to write proposals. He would ask us to help in the organization of conferences and workshops, so we would learn how those things run. So by the time you become an assistant professor, you know that you're ready. And honestly, compared to other people who had a postdoc, I always felt very well prepared. So I guess that being successful means that you see that your work is having an impact, and you see that your peers, your research community appreciate that. And whether that's in the form of citations of your papers or awards, or other things that they may come. It's that appreciation from your community. Again, you may feel very accomplished yourself, but if no one cares about what you are doing, maybe something is missing. Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah. So it's true. Yeah. As you mentioned, the fact that many people go through a postdoc after PhD, and I've been there myself. Well, it's definitely more on the side of that. That it's extremely rare that someone would get tenured without a postdoc, or at least 2, 3, 4. And of course, you can find articles, long articles on the topic of being trapped in the postdoc circle, right?
Yeah.
Which is increasing. So it's definitely quite rare. So having been tenured relatively young, as you obviously also feel yourself, what would you say? Okay, besides obviously having that good mentor who really cares about you, and puts you through the training you need in order to get tenured later on. So besides that supportive professor who is leading your work, what would you say are maybe the other components to get tenured without the postdoc, if I should put it that way?
So I can, at the very least, think of two things. The first one is being focused. In other words, the topic that I've been working on has been an evolution of the topic that I work as a PhD student. That doesn't need to be for everyone, especially because when you start on a tenure track, one of the comments that you many times get is that how are you going to differentiate from your advisor? And if you continue on working on the same topic, it's likely that your advisor too. So people will say, "What's new, right?" Or "How are you doing?" So of course, I was focused on continuing with a line because that was a line that was only going to grow. I expanded to another topic. In that case, was not just a totally different topic. Was no, look, still in the context of nano-communication networks. Let's look also into optical frequencies, not just terahertz frequencies. So I was able to somehow use the same type of tools, the same reasoning, but just change some of the elements to actually come up with a different area. But strictly speaking, if you ask me what I can do, well, I've been learning tools that I have been able to apply in different areas, but always within a focused vision, right? Again, if you look at what we do in the lab, it's everything terahertz with a few projects on optics. And that's how it has been. So, and I say that in contraposition of what some other people do. Like, let's say that this year there is this hot topic and this agency is asking for proposals on that topic. People will jump to that, and sure, to write a good proposal, you need to have preliminary results. So if you just write on a topic today because it's hot today, people who have been there before will have a stronger proposal, and how many preliminary works you will be able to do. Imagine that then you say, okay, so I tried this proposal, didn't work, but now this is the new hot topic. And then they start working on another topic, and again, send a proposal, but okay, will they have time to work to put preliminary results? Not really, because they don't have them. So that's why I say trying to be focused means that, well, you work on something and you try to present what you're doing, you try to align what you're doing with what is needed, but always being able to claim preliminary results. So claim that you have expertise on what's needed. So that's important. And again, I had friends that unfortunately didn't get tenure because they were doing that, right? They were doing, topic hopping, and let's try this, let's try that, let's try that. They were maybe sending 10 proposals a year on 10 different topics. But now none of those proposals, how can one mind make deep technical contributions on 10 different topics a year? Honestly, mine cannot. My mind cannot do that. And it's hard. Some people succeed, but I don't think that's a recipe for success. So what I would say is, if you are convinced on a topic, go with it, go deep with it, and eventually the funding will come. I can tell you that for the topic I've been working on, this terahertz, right? We started talking about terahertz for nano applications, then we opened it up to terahertz in general, nano applications, macro applications. And for many years, the question was, terahertz communications will never work. We didn't, they are too high frequency, the technology is not there, the channel is not there, but we still kept doing that. And eventually it worked, and I would say it was 2019, right after 5G was approved, that many companies said, now that millimeter wave is done, we want to jump at what's next. What's next? Terahertz. Who is doing terahertz? These few guys, one of them my group. So that gave us an edge. So there has been a change in the last few years? Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that I gave up on the topic. So what I would say, focus on what you think you're doing. If it's good, go for it. Maybe diversify a little bit. So don't put everything in one topic, but don't go to 10 different topics. Then you cannot focus. Then you cannot do much. That's one of the elements. The other element, which I think is as important, is build your network. Your network of collaborators, people you work with, but also the networks of people you may not work with, but you may go to the same conferences, you may publish in the same venues, you may find on the same panels, because those people sometimes can give you an external vision of what you're doing and tell you are going right or you're not going right, or maybe that's where you should focus. Because if you focus, sometimes what happens is that you go too deep and then you lose context. So it's good to have people that can help you unfocus, but not unfocus technically, just to look at the bigger picture. So the network is the people who will help you better understand and then better present your work. It's also the people that down the line will help you with nominations for awards, will help you with and getting that conference organizing committee membership that you wanted, or this and that. Because at the end of the day, those are the people who know you and who will be easy for them to write good things about you, right? So that's the other thing that I would say. And I'm sure there are more, but those two come at the top.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. What role would you say creativity plays in research?
Creativity.
Yeah. For yourself, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the main thing, honestly. So I think that it needs to be okay. So when I think of research, I think of maybe at least two groups of research. There is the research that has a new idea that maybe to prove that new idea, you don't need the most complicated math, but it's a new idea. And then there is the research, which is, let's just make things look complicated. And, we all know what the final result is, but let's derive very complicated mathematical proof for that. If I already know the result, that's not new. To me, that's not research. And that's one thing that I tell also to my students. This is something that happened to me when I was a student. And I think that sometimes it happens to my students, which is like, I value a lot the idea. Like, is what you're proposing something new that it's not obvious? But actually, when someone explains to you, says, wow, that's a smart. That's the type of research I'm looking for. And that means creativity. As opposed to papers that can write 20 pages of equations, but the final message is that 2 + 2 is 4. I already knew that 2 + 2 is 4. I don't need to write 20 pages of equations, right? And I understand that in a society, in an academic society in which the more papers you publish, the better it is, and some of the venues, the more equations you have, the better your paper is. Well, I'm a little bit not aligned with that vision. I'm actually think that what we want to do is to show things that are new, and that if the proof is simpler, well, the simpler the better. Honestly, no need to complicate things.
Well, of course. I mean, yeah, the simplicity is a sign of those best theories, right?
Yeah, but you say it, of course. But believe me, sometimes we get papers rejected saying this is there are not enough equations, or the derivation is too trivial. Well, are you judging the idea or the methods to get to the idea? Because of course, once I explain you something, it's obvious, but no one has thought of it, right? And I didn't need 12 equations to do that.
Right. So yeah, I guess this kind of melts down to the fact that sometimes the academics tend to get lost, right, in the details unnecessarily. Yes. Right. So you already talked a little bit about it, but collaboration is this is a huge part of the scientific progress. Could you maybe highlight the most memorable collaborations you had and their impact on your research?
Absolutely. So indeed, I mean, collaboration is critical, and you want to collaborate with people with whom you have something in common, but with whom you have things not in common, right? So you want to collaborate on a given topic, but you don't want to work with someone who can do exact same things that you can do, because that doesn't bring anything to the team, right? If anything, that will bring problems, because it's going to be difficult to separate who is doing what. So I always think, try to collaborate with people who don't do exactly what you're doing, but with whom you can converge. I'm going to mention first a collaboration that might not be the most typical, but when I was at Buffalo, let's start with the typical one. When I joined the university at Buffalo, I guess that, again, I was doing terahertz communications at a time in which people were telling me, this will never work, there are no devices, the channel is horrible, why are you even trying, right? So my goal was to work with people who could help me build those devices, so I could show that the devices work, and then use the devices to show that the channel is not that bad, and so on. So when I joined the university at Buffalo, despite being a comms person, I was not working with other communications and networking people. I was working with a material scientist, Professor Erik Einarsson, also an assistant professor, and I was working with Professor Jonathan Bird, who actually now is the department chair in Buffalo, who was a nanoelectronics person. right? So people will say, you're a comms person, you work with comms people. No, I'm a comms person, I work with a material scientist and an nanoelectronics person. Why? Because they could create the materials and then they could use the materials to create the devices that I wanted to use for my comms. And that was a very productive collaboration. We got papers, we got funding, and actually that was great. Of course, my position, when I'm working with them, I was the application of what they were doing, right? So I was saying, this is what I want to do, therefore I need this expertise from here and that expertise from that, right? So I was presenting myself as an application-driven project, right, with people who can build to it. Another academic collaboration that has been very productive has been the collaboration, in this case, with Professor Dan Mittelman, who is at Brown University, and Professor Edward Knightley, who's at Rice University. In this case, the collaboration, I knew they were working on terahertz and they knew that I was working on terahertz, but again, the collaboration started because Dan Mittelman is a physicist working on terahertz technology. Edward Knightley is a networking person. Well, to bridge physics with networks, you need the comms, right? And that was what I was, right? And they reached out to me. We knew each other from events and this and that, but they reached out to me, say, look, we think we need you for this project. And I think that, together we can complement. And honestly, this was one of the best things that happened, because indeed, I could learn physics directly from one of the top terahertz physicists, that's Dan. And I could not just, stop at communications. We can actually start talking about networks at terahertz frequencies by learning from an actual expert and very well-positioned person, which is Edward Knightley. So that was honestly a very good collaboration. These are all academic collaborations, if you think of it. There is another collaboration. Usually people have collaborations within academia, collaborations with industry. That's where they stop. And then and I have some collaborations with industry, but they have not been at the same level. But there is another type of collaborator that I had, which is a collaboration with the US Air Force. You will say, really? What did you do? So, when I was in Buffalo, for 4 summers, I spent 2 to 3 months every summer as a visiting faculty at the Air Force Research Lab in Rome, New York. The Air Force Research Lab has this visiting faculty program, and some of the colleagues at Buffalo had spent many years going there, like literally 20 years back to back working with them. So they told me, say, Josep, why don't you consider this? They might be interested on terahertz, so you try to work with them. So again, through the department connections, I managed to be able to join as a visiting faculty the US Air Force. And at that time, I was working with this researcher, Dr. Nue Thawdar, who, again, was a researcher at the Air Force, and with whom, together, I would say, we shaped what we thought was the main critical capabilities of terahertz for the applications they needed. And of course, this is a collaboration that led to many projects, and many faculty, when they think, oh, you work with the Air Force, it's because you want to get their money. No, that's not what we were looking. Actually, there was no money at the beginning. This was, you pay my summer salary and we'll work together and we'll get ideas. But eventually it evolved into more, but that's what we did. And again, in this case it helped me to know how to properly sell my work or present my work, not just in the nano domain, but in the macro domain and with some applications that became later on obvious. And some people say, oh, you have many papers with that program manager. So, well, I have many papers with that person before it was a program manager, that person when it was a researcher, and we were trying to work together, and we did that over 4 summers. So yeah, that's what it is.
Right. Okay. So you mentioned you collaborate with the industry too. What collaboration do you have, and what's the?
So very good question. So right now, we work with different companies in the sense that they sponsor some small projects, but I would say perhaps the most productive industry collaboration that we have right now is the collaboration with Keysight Technologies. I think you may know the company.
Yeah.
So with Keysight, the situation is the following. With Keysight, the experimental capabilities that I have in my group, it's an integration of some devices from Keysight, some devices from Virginia Diodes, some devices from NASA JPL. And the idea is that, well, at the beginning, I was reaching out to Keysight when I had to buy things from them. So it was a customer-seller relation. But eventually, they actually realized that what we were doing with their hardware were things that it was actually giving value to their hardware. In other words, every time that I would go around and demonstrate what we can do as an integration of all these pieces of equipment from different vendors, they realized that that actually was a selling point for them. That's true, but also we were using their devices beyond what they have thought they could be used, right? So it was taking things to the next level. So at some point, we changed the relation from customer and manufacturer of equipment to actually collaborator. And today, and for the last couple of years, Keysight Technologies has been one of the sponsors of our institute, the Institute for the Wireless Internet of Things at Northeastern. And honestly, it's being fun. And by collaboration, I don't mean that they just give me money and we do something. No, it means that some of my students are on weekly calls with some of the engineers developing some of this equipment. So we're influencing, and we are learning from and influencing one of the major, or perhaps one of the world's largest equipment manufacturers. So that's very exciting.
Right. Yeah, that's quite interesting. So you basically started generating like new product ideas for them by what you were doing, basically helping them out with that.
Yeah.
Interesting. Next question. So you're an editor on multiple journals, scientific, academic journals. So what are the biggest challenges in being in the role of editor or chief editor here?
Okay, indeed. So I'm editor-in-chief from Elsevier Nano Communication Networks. Together, we are two editors-in-chief. That's with Massimiliano Pierobon, as I mentioned before, my Ph.D. buddy and very good friend. This journal was created actually by my advisor in 2010, and eventually, when we became senior enough, he handed it over to us. So actually, it's very nice. Let me tell you this. So as an editor-in-chief, I get to see every paper that gets submitted to us, and we get to do a first press screening. So first of all, there are papers that are clearly out of scope. So when I see a paper that, look, I know you're just trying to squeeze it to make it fit in the scope of the journal, but if not, I think I make a favor to the authors by right away try to get back to them and say, look, this paper will not fly through here. Try to find somewhere else. And sometimes I make specific recommendations, like, look, try this other journal or try that journal, and that's fine. If the paper is within topic, but when I scan through it, I see that this is going to be a pain to review because the quality of presentation, it's not where it's supposed to be. The use of English, it's not correct. At that time, I also send it back to the authors and said, look, this is a paper that could fit, but you really need to bump up the writing style or this and that, because if not, what will happen is that the reviewers will not understand your work, and then it eventually will be rejected, and you will have wasted 3 months or something like that. For the papers that are within the topic and look quite reasonable, then as an editor-in-chief, I pass it down to the editors. And usually I get to pick an editor that is related to the topic. And I think that a very important thing is that through the years, I've learned, that a good editor is not necessarily someone who has published a lot in that topic or who has many awards on the topic. Is someone who spends the time looking at the paper and identifying the best reviewers for that topic, right? So if you look at the editorial board of NanoComNet, you will see that there are many assistant professors, young people in industry, because you see that they are the ones that end up spending good quality time helping the paper. And that's another thing that we propagate to our editors. As editors, our goal is that if a paper has a good idea, even if it's not in its best shape, let's try to help the authors to shape that idea in a way that it deserves to be published, and eventually the work comes out, right? So the work should be, this paper should be rejected because it's not good. No, the paper might need to be rejected because while this is interesting, this, and this is missing, come back to us when you fix it, right? So there should always be feedback. So as an editor-in-chief, I pick editors and I assign papers after filtering them. And that's interesting. As a regular editor, like I'm an editor for IEEE Transactions on Communications or also Scientific Reports by Nature, this very recently. In that case, as an editor, the paper has already been pre-screened, right? So the editor-in-chief has already looked at it, has already done some checks. So when it comes to me, I can tell you for IEEE transactions on communications, the papers that come to me are papers that they have been very carefully picked. So they come to me, I know the topic, and many times I even end up knowing the work of those authors. So it helps. Now my work is to go and look for reviewers. And there are different types of reviewers, right? There are reviewers who are working on the exact same thing. And that means that sometimes they may try to make sure that the paper doesn't get accepted so they can publish it first. That's usually not the case, but you want people working in the same area, but you want people who are fair and who share your values. That the goal as a reviewer is not to make the authors feel miserable with their life. The work of a reviewer is to help the authors get the paper to a stage that it can be published. If they can do that in 2 months, you give them a revision. If you want to help them, but they need more than 2 months, you end up saying that, look, this paper is rejected, address all of this, it will take you some time, then come back, right? So that's how I see my editorial work. And again, I would say what has changed is that I used to be a reviewer for many venues, then the editorial work came in, then you realize that it's difficult to do a good job both as an editor and as a reviewer. So I end up prioritizing being an editor, and I try to recommend my students or the younger colleagues to help our reviewers, knowing that eventually they will transition to editors too, right? It's a process.
Right. So the academics on your board of the journal, are they, because I've noticed, I checked the journal webpage and it looks very, very niche. Yeah. So I wonder, are all the editors like the whole pool of people who are doing the review, or do you also have to contact external people?
So the editors will usually involve external people. So yes, nano communication networks, it's still a relatively niche topic. It's a topic that will only work because if you think the next level of connectivity, it's not to connect you through the internet or to devices or to other people with things with your hands. If you ask me, and that's perhaps the craziest thing I'm going to say today, if you ask me, the next level of connectivity is to connect the cells in your body, whether it's your brain or different functionalities, to provide either to help you recover capabilities that our body has lost or to enhance capabilities, right? And that's what nano communication networks is at the end of the day, right? It's enabled to, learn how to communicate extremely small devices, which potentially are going to be in your body. Now, all the people in the editorial board have published in this area under different flavors. Sometimes it's electromagnetics, optics, sometimes it's molecular, sometimes it's neuroscience focused, sometimes it's something else. And what happens is the editors then, they need to go and find reviewers. Sometimes an editor may help with a review, but many times it's going to be other people who are not in the editorial board. Again, not everyone is in the editorial board, first of all, because we renew the editorial board. You don't want to have, and I myself don't know for how many more years will be an editor-in-chief. I think that for a journal is healthy to renew the team. Of course, the more years you are, a better model from the different people you have, right? And you know that editor is very good at that type of papers, but maybe not at that other type. And you know which reviewers are trustworthy or this and that. But at some point, you need to pass it on and let other people have this opportunity.
All right. So since you're an editor-in-chief in nano communication networks, you shared what were the responsibilities for that role. And how about the challenges? What are the biggest or big challenges being an editor of a journal?
That's actually a very good point. So I think that the main challenge is, first of all, to find people who have the time to commit for this, because at the end of the day, being an editor or being a reviewer, it's a job that it's not paid. It's somehow, part of your duties as an academic, but you don't get anything out of it. And the reality is that if you think today, there are so many possible venues when people can publish, which means that there are so many possible venues that need reviewers, that by the end of the day, it's hard. Like, for example, yesterday I woke up and out of the 10, 12 emails that I had that were not spam, most of them were requests to review. Can you review this? Can you review that? Can you review that? Like different venues, like overnight, 3, 4 requests. And it's like, And this happens to everyone, right? So it's difficult to find people who are willing to commit the time, mostly not because they don't want, just because they don't have the time, right? And this happens to all of us. So I think that the things that are happening is that we are going towards younger and younger reviewers. Like, for example, when I was a student, if, I could maybe review one or two papers, or my advisor would, say, okay, maybe could you share your thoughts? But that's about it. Now today, when I reach out to reviewers, I explicitly say, look, if you cannot, but you have a postdoc or a senior graduate student, someone who has been in the field working on a while, I'll be happy, because also let's think, usually the PhD students, by the time that they are getting close to the graduation, they are the real experts in a topic, right? They are the ones that have really looked for every possible related work, really try to position themselves. So that's the thing, finding reviewers and finding reviewers who have the time. And the other thing that we say is like, when someone asks me to review, right, and it's someone that I know, there is always that dilemma. Should I say yes so they don't get pissed, knowing that probably I will be late? Or should I be transparent and say, look, I could tell you yes, but I'm going to be late. Why don't you find someone else? So, and that's also happened. So one thing that I really appreciate, right, when I ask someone, if they say yes, that's great. If they say no, and they could suggest someone instead, say, look, I cannot, but why don't you ask this and that? That would be very helpful, right? So make more part of the process this. I guess that the other thing that is interesting is that, and with this, we haven't had any problem, at least in NanoComNet. It's like, when people read a paper as a reviewer, some of them, it seems that their mission is, let's see how we can get this paper rejected. And that's very wrong. The goal should be, let's see if this paper can be accepted, or if not, how can we help the authors to make a paper that can be accepted, right? So we don't need to go with, a point and shoot mentality. We need to go with, let's see how can we do. And again, you find reviewers like that, and those are the ones you want to keep. You find teams for your editorial board like that. Those are the ones that you want to keep.
Right. So yeah, you touched quite a few things in this answer. No, it's great actually. So you say that you don't get anything out of being an editor, but it's kind of considered an honor and service to the community, as far as I understood. Is that so?
Yes. I mean, so part of our work is supposed to be teaching, research, and service. And being an editor or being a reviewer, it's service. And if there were no editors or reviewers, no one could publish. So then there would not be research worth doing, right? So it's a necessary element. The problem is when this becomes, instead of 20% of your time, it becomes 40% of your time, right? So it's finding that balance, or what could be and I don't have the answer for that, but what could be a potential reward for that editor who's handling many papers, or that reviewer who consistently turns in very high quality reviews that aim at improving the work, right? I guess that we have not implemented that vehicle, and that could be interesting.
Yeah, another point you've touched was that shooting down of papers, and well, I mean, in some way, like, this is the basically premise on which the prestige of the journals is built upon, isn't it?
Yes, I guess that when usually we try to publish, we look for journals that have the highest impact factor. The impact factor, it's a measure of how many times the papers that have been published in the last, it can be 3 years or 5 years or even 1 year, how many times those papers have been cited. Of course, a good paper gets cited, right? So, I mean, in an ideal world, good papers get cited independently of where they are. It's also true that some people will say, look, I won't even read the paper, but because it was published in that very good venue, let's just cite it. It will give us credibility. So it's a little bit like that. But yeah, I mean, again, so if you have the goal for a journal is to have good papers coming out, and ideally coming out quickly, right? So people want the work to be timely. if to take a bad paper and make it a good paper can take 2 years, that's not good, right? Even if the reviewers try to help. So that's, I think, when the editor steps in, right? So you need to have, well, how can I say this? You still need to try to improve a paper. Then it's up to the editor. If that's improvement, it's something that can happen in a month, then it's a minor revision, or 2 months, then it's a major revision, or more than 2 months, then you say, look, it's great, but I'm sorry, you cannot continue with us, right? That's it. But again, if you look, for example, where everyone wants to publish, Nature or Science. Actually, let me tell you a couple of things of those. So we have papers in Nature, we have one paper in Science, and some of the other high impact journals. And what I would say is that, first of all, the quality of reviews that I got when we submitted there, even those who got rejected, those papers that got rejected, have always been very high. You can tell that the reviewers have spent the time, right? And even the editor. Many times the rejections happen at the editorial level, right? The paper doesn't even not go out for review. And that's nice. Of course, in Nature, Science, and some of these top profile journals, there is like the editor-in-chief of one of these journals, that's their position. They are paid for this. That's the difference. So that's another interesting thing, right? That it's no longer free service from generous people. It's a still service from generous people who get paid. So that's something to take into account.
So they are professional editors, and that's their job.
Yes.
Right. And in the case of the nano communication networks, so how do you handle that? I mean, in terms of wanting to increase the impact factor of your journal, but at the same time, not publishing everything.
Yes, that's a good question. So let me give you some statistics from NanoComNet. So first of all, for NanoComNet, it's both Massimiliano Pierobon and myself who run as editors-in-chief. This allows us to share the load and also to have internal discussions when some papers come and like, look, I think this is not ready, even after a round of review. So many times we make decisions at the starting point, and this journal gets between 200 and 300 submissions a year, which it's not that many. It's a good number, it's a healthy number, but not that many as one of your favorite top journals. And the way we proceed is the following, right? Every time I get a paper come in, after having the administrative checks, the paper comes to me, right? Or to Massimiliano. And at that stage, the first thing that I do is scan the paper. And first, the paper needs to be aligned with the journal, and NanoComNet, it's a relatively niche topic, right? Nano communication networks, right? It's not communication networks, it's not nanotechnologies, it's the intersection of nanotechnologies, if you want, biotechnologies and communications, right? So there are not too many things that fit in that intersection. So that's good. And many times, I would say maybe 1/4 of the papers that are submitted are really not aligned with the journal. So in that case, we got back to the authors right away, and many times it's just 1 or 2 days from their submission. We try to be very timely and say, look, your paper looks interesting, but this is not what the readers of NanoComNet want. So that goes out. Then, of course, the papers that stay in, the goal is, if it's a paper that is aligned with NanoComNet, and NanoComNet is not such of a huge topic, we probably have an expert on that topic in the editorial board. And that's what we have been trying to do. So the first step is you need editors-in-chief who can be on top of things, but you need reliable editors, right? And editors who are experts in the different flavors of nano-communication networks. And through the years, I think we came to a point that we have a good editorial board. Of course, the editorial boards, like other editors, they get renewed. They stay with us for 2 years, and then they can be renewed for 2 years more. Then the healthy thing is to let them go. And then after some years, they can come back, right? You don't want to have an editor that stays there forever. And this applies also to the editors-in-chief, right? So we renewed once, and I think now we are on our second and potentially last stage, right? It's not good that the same people are always handling the same journal and the same editors and the same reviewers. Sometimes you need new, fresh ideas. So once again, how do we keep NanoComNet up? Well, we try to be timely ourselves. We have tried to put editors who are experts in the field who can themselves also decide if the paper moves forward or not before going out for review. And then when it comes to the reviewers, well, we try to be, we try to identify again reviewers who are reliable. We all understand, right? Through COVID, many things got delayed. People had to learn how to work with the kids yelling in the background and things like that. And that's fine. So we've all been always, I think, very aware of the time constraints from everyone. And that's okay. That's what we're doing. I mean, the other way is, again, for a journal that it's not for a journal that it's not one of the top typical journals, one of the things that you need is also to make sure that the people know that you exist. The good news of NanoComNet is that it has existed for more than 10 years. It's a journal that is fully indexed, so we have had an impact factor since 2017. So all this is good, right? People know that we exist, but for the newcomers, well, maybe we need to do that. So usually when there are conferences or when we give talks, we always end up mentioning this too, right? If you like what you see, probably you can find more by looking into our journal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to go back a little bit to that, what you mentioned about the rotation and the needed rotation of the editors and the editors-in-chief. So what is the potential danger there? Why do they need to be rotated after time?
First of all, it's even if we all try to learn and be open to the new tendencies and flavors and this and that, we all have our preferred areas, or there is the things that I work and then there are the other things. So we need to make sure that the journal is open to everything, and that's what we try to do. And for example, the nice thing of working with Massimiliano is that Massimiliano's focus is on molecular and biological communication networks, whereas my focus is more on the nanophotonic, nanoelectronic, electromagnetic communications networks, right? So between the two, we pretty much cover everything in nano, so we can have the big picture. But this is what we have tried to do with the journal, right? Clearly two paths, clearly bring an editorial board. But even if I think myself as a young person with ideas, well, there are younger people that who may have even better ideas, or there might be more seasoned people who have had similar experiences and want to step in. And I'm fine with that. I think it's healthy.
Better ideas in what sense?
Well, I don't know, maybe ideas to increase the number of high quality submissions, or better ideas to have fidelization of your reviewers. So knowing that even if they are very busy, when they see an invitation from you to review, they say, oh no, absolutely, I'm not turning them down. There are things that, if you ask me, we're trying to do everything that can be done, but maybe there are things that I'm missing.
Like in terms of so do I get it right that you mean in terms of the editorial work itself and how to advance maybe the way the journal functions?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I see. You also mentioned you get like 10 to 12 emails asking you to review something. So how do you handle that, knowing the pressure from both sides? Like, how do you allocate it?
That's something that has been evolving. Originally, I was always very afraid of saying no, right? And you'll try to do it, and you would allocate a huge amount of time for that, and that's fine. Then at some point, you need to start being more selective, but not because, how can I say this? Not because you don't want to do it, but because if I know that I'm going to be the reviewer that is late, that ends up delaying the overall decision of a paper by a month just because I'm late, that also makes me feel very bad. So if I have to be, when do you feel worse? By telling someone you know that you cannot review the paper, or by telling yes and then having that person chasing you for a month till you finally can do the review? So you look at those and you realize that, well, maybe it's better that you're transparent from the beginning. So many times that's what I do these days. The thing that I do, however, is the following. If a paper comes to me, it is within my area, and it's exactly what I'm doing these days. I said, look, okay, I probably can review this in 3-4 hours, and I'll accept it. If it's a paper that it's related to what we're doing, but I think that someone in my group, a postdoc, a senior PhD student, someone can do a better job, I'll actually will write back to the editors and say, look, I could review this paper, but I don't have the time. If you trust me, you can ask directly this person in my group or in my lab who can do that. So because as an editor, I appreciate when people give me alternatives. When I'm asked as a reviewer, I make sure to provide alternatives, right? It's just fair game. And of course, my students, for example, many of my students are international students, right? And some of them, their goal is to stay in the US when they graduate, for which they will apply for a green card and this and that, right? Service, like being regular reviewers of good journals and good conferences, it's actually a very good thing to have in your CV. It means that other people trust your opinion, right? So that's good. And at the end of the day, then I try to do that, right? So the first time that I will ask one of my students to review a paper, we'll both do the review. They will read the paper, do a review. I'll read the paper, do a review. Then we'll sit together and see, first of all, how to structure it, and also if we identify the same things. Once I can tell that a student can run reviews by themselves, also because they get to see the reviews from the papers I submit, then it's when I feel comfortable directly recommending them to officially be asked to do the review, right? That gives them value. I do my job as an advisor by training them to do the reviews, and I have one less review to do myself, which is not bad.
Right. Wow. Yeah. You are definitely a very good supervisor to have. I can tell you that much.
I don't know, but
I've heard a
yeah.
lot of stories about different kinds of supervisors. So yeah.
Yeah, I bet. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So following question. So the publishing system, which is that, let's say, single blind peer review system, it's been around for a while. And obviously, besides the digitization and everything kind of speeding up thanks to the internet, not much has changed. Yes, and besides that, so are there any changes you would like to see in the current publishing system, or maybe the changes you are already working on in the Nanocoms network?
Well, I guess that, and that's a very good observation. Right? The system seems to be the same, just if anything gets overcrowded. Yeah. So what I would say is, and I need to be very careful with what I say, but what I would say is that things like having to impose double blind, which means you don't know who the authors are. Of course, the authors don't know the reviewers, or even triple blind. Not even the editor knows who the paper is coming from. These things are happening more and more often because, unfortunately, right, the system does not always work, right? And there have been cases, and I'm not going to give names, even if you ask, I'm not going to give names. There have been cases of some major conferences in which the whole system, was rigged. Like, I'll accept your paper if you accept mine. Then they made it double blind. That's okay. That's the title of my paper. That's the title of my paper. So this has happened, right? The good news is that we have evolved. I would say journals have not evolved as much as peer-reviewed conferences, in the sense that some of the good conferences in the field, they have double blind or triple blind, that's okay, but they have first, they collect reviews, then there is actually a discussion phase, which can be an in-person discussion or a Zoom discussion between the reviewers, so the reviewers get to know each other, right? And try to see. And many times it is in those personal discussions that either you see that some person who was very in favor of, very against of a paper, they actually don't speak much, and that usually means that maybe they are afraid to reveal themselves. Or, well, that's when you get to see, right? If suddenly you have someone really trying to convince everyone, no, that paper is good, really believe me, this and that, then you start thinking, why does this guy have a personal interest with this paper, right? So we need to be a little bit more objective when we evaluate, right? And objective doesn't mean that we still need to, we are the ones who decide. I mean, a paper will get published either because it's a very new topic, or, and that's the best thing, a paper on a new topic that it's technically sound. Or you also have papers which is the topic is not new, but it's a new solution that improves the performance by a given factor. That's fine. There is a third type of paper that I really don't like, which is the topic is not new, the solution is not new, but they put so many equations that the reviewers didn't understand or dare to understand, but no one dares to say, why did you put so many equations to tell me that 2 + 2 is 4? And believe me, those papers get published too, right? You see papers that you say, okay, I'm reading this paper, I'm lost through the math. I look at the results, and the results literally tell you that 2 + 2 is 4. That, I mean, again, some people like that type of work. I personally don't, but that's what it is. I do think, and I don't know, this can go both ways, right? These days, people are afraid that through artificial intelligence, right, you can have ChatGPT write a paper for you, right? And I'm afraid of that in the sense that, they can write convincing papers, but instead of thinking of AI at the bad part that it can give us, which is, random papers generated with people who have no idea about it, I think that we could certainly add, whenever we do a review process, let's add a fourth reviewer, which is, an AI-driven tool, because they are the ones who really know the state of the art, because they have indexed every single paper in Google Scholar. So, hey, I mean, if you're claiming that this is new, maybe they will not go check your derivations, but they can absolutely make sanity checks on the novelty of the content, right? Again, you need to be very careful. If you go to ChatGPT and you ask ChatGPT 5 technical questions, probably half of them, the answer to 2 or 3 of them will be wrong. So we need to be careful. But what I would say is, summarizing, at the conference level, new things have been tried, and the discussion phase has been good. Even after the discussion, there are many conferences that now allow a rebuttal. So you send your feedback after a panel, then you send back your answers, like in a journal, and there might be a follow-up panel. I think that's great. For journals, we're still stuck to reviews, usually no discussion between the reviewers. And again, when do we do that? Conferences happen once a year, so it makes sense to put all the reviewers in a room and try to discuss. Journals get submitted any time of the day, any day of the year. How would you pull that off, right? So it's not easy. It's not easy. There are some ideas, but work to be done. But well, let's see who is the brave one.
Right. Yeah, like in terms of the ChatGPT, I would be very doubtful that it actually can write a sensible paper. I mean, after all, what it is that it condenses the whole whatever database or the whole internet of information it has access to that probabilistic sequence of words, right? So it really doesn't do reasoning as such.
Yeah. At least not as of today. Yeah.
Right. I mean, like, okay, at least through the it seems to me that it even won't. The large language model will never be able to do reasoning. Because it's beyond the probability, right?
Yeah.
To me, anyway. But
there've been cases of papers fully written by the equivalent of ChatGPT that got published, but of course not in top venues. So again,
but those must have been some social sciences or something like that, wasn't it? Because in physics,
no one was deriving new equations. No one was deriving new equations. Yes, you're right. You're right.
Yeah. So I get it. Yeah, for that kind of in these let's say social sciences, or softer sciences, which are not
sciences. Yes.
Yeah, that's very possible, right? But in nano-communication networks, engineering, physics, math, I don't think so. Not anytime soon, anyway. Like, of course, the general AI would obviously surpass everything, but it's nowhere near, or at least what
as
it
far
seems
as we know.
like today. Yeah. Unless this whole is already a simulation, we're just going.
Yes.
And would you are there maybe any, let's say, other more effective or different ways to spreading the research results compared to written papers you can think of?
So that's let me think a little bit. I mean, what I would say first of all is that today there are too many publications, in the sense that there are so many journals, there are so many conferences, there are so many workshops. If someone wants to publish something, even that 2 + 2 is 3, they will find a venue that will take it, right? And that's a problem, because especially when you're trying, let's go back itself to, first year of PhD student. as a PhD student. You're supposed to look at the state of the art. When the state of the art is 20, 40, even 60 papers or 100, that's okay. You can do a little bit of classification, then go in depth into those you like. But when your starting points, it's 1,000 papers, and every day you need to add 10 or 20 more, your first year of PhD, it's a disaster, right? You cannot do that. And the problem is that at least in the US and in Europe, to a large extent, things are changing, and we don't judge a research group by how many papers they publish. We judge about what's the impact of those papers, right? And what those papers say, right? But that's not necessarily everywhere in the world. Again, you can look at the university system in different countries, and you will see that many of them, the metric by which their faculty are ranked or renewed or evaluated is by how many papers that they publish, and that's a problem. Of course, they say, no, we don't look at papers published, we look at citations. That's a much better thing, right? You're looking at impact, but that's also something that you can bias, because once again, if you yourself publish 40 papers a year and your friend publish also 40 papers, you can just cite each of your other papers in every paper, which is an extreme. But you can also do that with your friends, right? So it's very easy for if a group, department of university system wants to, game the system, they can. So that's, maybe publications and citations is not the only thing. Other things, like for example, here in the US, right? It's quite common that the productivity of a faculty is measured in how many dollars did this faculty bring in, right? How much funding did you get? And I think that that's a good first step, right? Because to do things, you need money. But then there is another indicator, which is, okay, but what did you do with that money? If every year you bring in $1 million, but the outcome of this, it's what, right? It needs to be something that has an impact. It can be trained PhD students, and sure, the more money you bring, the more students you have. That's a good thing. But also students that have that indicator, whether it's patents or publications or that. And I just mentioned patents. That's another indicator that usually in academia, we didn't take into account too much, right? Usually the way is like academia makes fundamental science, then companies build on that and create patents. This has changed quite a lot, right? All the universities are eager these days to make sure that that intellectual property is not just benefiting some, but the university itself, right? So I would say that's fine. But you asked me what are other ways besides publications to make sure that the research works well. I think we said it at the beginning, or actually in one of your very first questions, right? We do research because we like it, but that research needs to have an impact. And that impact means that the society needs to care. Ways to measure impact in society? Well, if it's not citations, it could be, as I said, patents, it could be companies, it could be products. I guess that at the very least, as an academic, it's how many people you have impacted. And the very first ones you impact are your students. So that could be another indicator.
Right. So tenured relatively younger than it's common. So what led to that achievement?
Very good question. So yes, again, I graduated 10 years ago, and I went straight from the PhD program to an assistant professor. During that time, I think that the main thing is that while I was a PhD student, my advisor took care of making sure that I was familiar not just with doing research, which of course is the first goal, but also in understanding the funding cycle. How do you get money to actually be able to do your research, right? And try to understand the different funding agencies, try to help maybe with contributions to proposals that he was writing, try to so that was one part, right? The cycle of funding. The other was the cycle of publishing, and not just the role of as an author, but understanding the role of an editor, the role of other reviewers, the role of a conference organizers. And again, towards we were getting closer to graduation, be involved into those meetings, maybe just to take care of the website of a conference. But still, you had to join all the meetings for all the organizing committee members, and you would hear a lot of things. So by the time we graduated and I joined Buffalo, I was ready to hit the ground and run, right? And that felt good, honestly. Be able to, again, you always learn and you have to learn a lot, But I could tell that I had received good training that now I'm trying to pass down to my students, right? So they help me when I need to write a proposal. They, as I said, I share with them how the reviews work, and when they are ready, they officially get asked to review. They see what we are doing in terms of conferences and workshops, how they can be helped. So when you start doing these things, you first realize that you have the tools to be, to get what you want to get. I would like to say another thing. The other thing is that if you look at all my work, it's very focused. In my group, we primarily do terahertz communications that can be nano applications or macro applications, but we do terahertz communications. And what I would say is that if you always work on the same topic, but of course you try to cover the different aspects of the topic, at some point, first of all, every year you understand how many things you didn't understand the year before. And believe me, right? I think, oh, people, Josep, you're an expert on terahertz. And I will say, well, I know quite a while, but believe me, the way I'm going to explain something this year is different from how I was explaining last year, because now I've started to see a different angle or a different perspective. The good news is that if you only have one core and you keep going around, eventually you'll get the 360 degree. And if needed, you'll get the full spheric vision of your problem. And that will make it easier for people to then classify you. And for example, when people will ask for, okay, should Josep get tenure? People will say, oh yeah, who was Josep? Josep is the terahertz guy, right? And then they said, yeah, he did all these works, this and that. And yeah, he consistently been in these conferences, in the journal. He's a good reviewer. He even got maybe 1 or 2 best paper awards. So I guess that part of the process of growing is the process of creating an identity. And different people work differently. There are people who like to work on many different topics, and as long as they can dedicate enough time to those different topics, that's okay. The cases in which things get complicated is when people just try to jump on top of every topic without having the time to spend on every topic. And when people say again, you're asking someone who evaluate a case, they say, oh, that guy, yeah, I see that he has been all over the place. I don't really know on what he's an expert. And part of the process of getting tenure is being recognized by people who don't know you. Remember how we get tenure, right? We get tenure by having people who have not written papers with you, who have no funding with you, who don't work with you, have those people write an evaluation letter about you and say, look, I don't know the guy, but I've seen this works, this, that, so I can tell a story about the guy. So it's creating that identity and being able to present that identity so people who even don't know you can quickly see it.
Yeah, seems like you've understood really those building blocks of the academic career quite early on, which is what basically enabled.
I guess that having good mentors around you, and again, of course, your PhD advisor is one of your mentors, and you keep them. But in the departments, you have colleagues, and colleagues are, usually are willing to help. Right, so listen to them, and of course, you can listen to many opinions. At the end, you will follow your own, but that has helped. And both when I was at Buffalo, so during my tenure track, and in the last 4 years since I've been here at Northeastern, and in these last 4 years, I've been able to go from associate professor to a full professor in 4 years, which is again quite easy. I think that it has to do with, again, continuing the things that I learned before, but also listening and especially looking at those people who are successful and see if their way to being successful is the way you want it to be. Because there are many ways to do that, right? There are people who are successful because they are, very aggressive and very driven. There are people who are successful because they are, very understanding, accommodating, and they grow because people eventually get to like them, right? There are different types of way to to getting there, and you pick which one you like. But we do have many references around us, so let's look at them, let's talk to them. And now when now some of the junior faculty reach out to me, I'm always happy to share how it worked for me and what they think. Then they can pick it or not, but I'm happy to help.
Right. So I want to touch a bit on the teaching. Do you teach courses?
Yeah.
Is it included in your professional evaluation? Because not all the universities really have that in place.
Yeah, so for us, yes. For us here at Northeastern, my workload, it's supposed to be 60% research 20 to 30% teaching, and the remaining it's service. Okay. How does it translate to? It translates that because I have a large research group, which right now, well, someone just graduated last week, so now it's 10 PhD students. Because this is a relatively large research group, I only need to teach 2 courses per year. And in my case, what I do is I like to teach 1 course every semester, so it doesn't take too much time. There are people who like, no, I want to teach the 2 courses in 1 semester, then I'm free. I'm okay. I honestly, I like teaching, so I don't mind, teaching the whole year, 1 course at a time. That's good. So yes, I'm teaching and I'm evaluated for that.
Okay. So do you have, let's say, some particular goals that once you reach them in the academic tenure or career, whatever you call it, that, once there, you will tell yourself, okay, I'm done with this, and now I can go on to, I don't know, whatever else that interests you?
That's a very deep question. I have to think a little bit. So, look, so first of all, I know that usually when you join as an assistant professor, many people will say your goal is to get tenure. Well, my advisor told me, and now my colleagues told me, no, that should not be the goal. The goal should be that you do a good job. And that's what we did, right? The goal was, let's keep doing what you like, which is research, and tenure will come. And that's what happened. The same, when we got tenure, say, okay, your next goal, what is it? Is to become, full professor, be promoted. And again, that should not be the goal. The goal is that you continue doing good work and things happen, right? And I guess that the difference between when you become associate professor to when you become full professor is that when you're an assistant professor, you're purely focusing on your research and teaching. When you go from associate to full, people want to see in you more of a leader. So someone who is not just doing good work, but people look up to, and who is also in different services outside the university, but also inside the university, right? Improve the system. I have had people tell me, oh, Josep, you always came across as a very research-centric person, and recently you have different roles. Like, for example, I'm the co-director of 2 new master programs at Northeastern, so I not only care about teaching, but I care about making sure that there is a path for our students. Or since the last summer, I'm the associate director for our institute, the Institute for the Wireless Internet of Things. And of course, that's not just a title that you put in your signature. That comes with some extra work that you have to do for the department, the institute, at the end, the college and the university to work. And someone was telling me, oh, Josep, but you always came across as a research-centric person. That's how I want to be. I'm like, yes, but at some point you realize that your research is going. You kind of see what's going. And again, that doesn't mean that all my papers get accepted. Absolutely not. We get papers in and we get papers out like everyone else. We have proposals in, we have proposals out. Some of them get accepted, some of them get not, like everyone else. But once that's happening, and you start to see also the bigger picture of where you are, see that, yeah, it's not just you and your group. It's the department, it's the institute, it's the university, or even it's the whole educational system. That's when you're seeing, okay, well, there are things that you don't like. There are things that you would like to change. And then it's when you jump in and say, okay, maybe I should start doing this type of service too. Now, I took a detour to what you told me, so what you asked me. So coming back, so when do I think I will stop? Well, it's hard. So first of all, when someone asks me, oh, Josep, you only do terahertz. What happens the day that terahertz becomes everywhere and it's in your cell phone? And I joke, then my job is done, right? Then I can move on and maybe, become a department chair or a dean or something, right? I will have solved a research problem. Now let me solve a bigger problem, which is a problem where there are humans involved. That's every time that there are people and feelings, the problem is much more challenging, right? So that's one of the things. There are some things that I look up to, like there are some memberships that would like become fellow of this or fellow of that, and that could be goals, right? But those are long-term goals. I was talking with one of my senior leaders at the university recently, and you say, Josep, so again, in 10 years, you went from PhD student to full professor, institute associate director, editor-in-chief of a journal. And when you put it in perspective, it looks like a lot, but it didn't happen all of a sudden. It was progressive. So this was 10 years. I'm 39. So you say, okay, fine. So what's going to happen in the next 10 years? I don't really know. I'll continue to do my work. I'll continue to judge or evaluate the opportunities that come my way, and we'll see. And if we get to the point that my research is done and there is nothing else to be done because everyone like this. I know that I will disappoint some people by saying this, but I don't think that I will jump to a totally different topic just because it's cool or something. I mean, to get to the point where we are, which is to somehow grow with a topic, there are so many times you can grow with a topic. There are people who are very good at that. And again, I would give the example of my advisor. My advisor was extremely good at identifying hot topics before they were hot, right? And he usually would turn them into hot topics. One of them is the one I am on, right? But he worked with different students on different topics, and that was his strength, identifying a topic that could potentially be hot and make sure that that topic becomes hot. When the topic was hot, let's jump to next. In my case, we worked together from the very beginning on a topic before it was hot, when people were saying terahertz doesn't make sense, right? And now that it's hot, I'm happy with it. Well, the day it's not hot, I may not be hot anymore either, but that's okay.
Right. Yeah, it kind of sounds like you're trying to basically be here and now. Like focus on what's in front of your nose, and the rest will fall in place.
Yeah.
One way or another.
Yeah.
It's a very healthy approach, definitely, because you don't need to stress over what will be, right? What should I do next? What should I do to keep the place where I am, or how should I even elevate myself higher, and so on. So I've peeked into your PhD thesis a little bit, and at the end of it, there was an interesting part saying that, describing all the future potential of the work to be done, and also some sort of a roadmap what should be done. So looking back, from where you are now, how would you say that your ideas have actually come to fruition from those 10 years ago?
It's a very good question. So what I would say is, so in that list of, first of all, I think that some things we managed to achieve, some things are closer, but we're still not there yet, right? And I'll give examples. So the field of terahertz communication has grown a lot, but more towards the macro scale than towards the nanoscale. And strictly speaking, my thesis was on the nanoscale apps. And only at the end, I said, look, beyond the nanoscale, we may be able to do macro scale. What happened is that the macro scale path, selling terahertz as the next technology for Wi-Fi or cellular networks, has been easier than selling terahertz as the technology that will allow intra-body or in the brain or in the paint embedded systems, right? And one of the reasons is that first, of course, social acceptance, right? When you tell people that, I'll tell you a story later. When you tell people that you're doing devices that may be in their body and this and that, some people get uneasy. Whereas when you say that you're giving them a faster cell phone, sure, okay, fine, right? So I would say the ideas have evolved quicker towards the macro scale, and that's good. I do still believe, however, that the nanoscale has a lot of things to give us. And to me, that's what should be next. What I'm actually saying many times is that from the moment that the big telecom companies, and you can pick the names, but if Apple, Qualcomm, Samsung, Huawei, any company, Ericsson, Nokia, if they are already doing terahertz communications, should an academic group be doing the same? I'm forming people to work on a topic in which industry at the same time has already hundreds of employees working on, right? So as a research group, I have little to do. Of course, there is still the workforce development part, which is good. But from the academic perspective that I want to do fundamental research, I need to be looking to the crazier part. So what's really happening within my group is as terahertz become more and more common practice, I'm not saying it's ready to be in the cell phones, but as it becomes more common and you have every big company has a group on terahertz, well, if they are already doing that, I need to look for what's crazy. And the what's crazy, it's actually not go beyond, it's to come back to the nano part. And the good news is that through these years, the main challenge for the nano part is the actual fabrication and integration. But that's something that a telecom engineer cannot solve. That's something that the material scientists need to solve. That's something that the nano fabrication people need to solve. And they are doing an extraordinary work. So I think that the path of the vision with what we can build, it's at the macro scale, it's together. At the nano scale, it's getting closer. So that's what I think is happening. I did tell you that I will share an anecdote about these nano devices. So if you read the thesis, so we talk about devices that can be very small, that can be anywhere. It was a little bit more than a year ago that I started getting some very strange messages on LinkedIn, on my email, on Twitter at that time. It was not X. People saying, oh, you will be judged. God will judge you. We caught you. You're going to die. I mean, really very ugly things. It's like, what happened, right? What have I done, right? And then it turns out that there was this, online streaming show that, for a few years had been doing some conspiracy theory type of studies that somehow managed to link some of these crazy theories about COVID and the vaccines for COVID having, 5G or 6G technology. Well, someone came with a brilliant idea of saying, like, look, COVID was engineered. The vaccines for COVID carry graphene, and there are some people who claim that. And that graphene, it's not just graphene. That graphene are graphene antennas that communicate at terahertz frequencies to control people remotely, including from satellites. And you say, what the? Then you look and they start, and we know who's behind of this, and they show my face. Okay. I said, what? And they, of course, they go through my publications, right? And of course, we have work on graphene nano antennas and graphene nano transceivers. That's part of the work. Yes, this work at terahertz. Separately, we have the work on macro scale terahertz, in which we talk about Wi-Fi type applications, but recently we've also been talking about space-based internet applications of terahertz. And someone went just and put together, says, that's the guy. And of course, then they say, of course, this is funded by the US Air Force. So the Department of Defense is behind of everything. So, there are people who are very creative. But
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, but some people perceive your research in a different way. That's why I say when I talk about the nanoscale application of terahertz, I always need to assess the room and see if I can say what I think we want to do or not.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, definitely some crazy people out there connecting the dots in a completely...
Again, it makes for a perfect, Hollywood movie. I mean, honestly, but
well, sure, to say the least. Definitely. That's right. Okay, I guess that really comes to an end now. Yeah, I've completed all my questions.
Good.
So yeah, thank you very much for being generous with your time.
Absolutely. And again, you asked me. Thank you for asking me questions that made me think. And sometimes, when I teach something, is the more when I need to explain something, it's when I really learn it. So when I was answering some of your questions, is when I realizing it's like, okay, that's what we did, right? I was running some sort of research on myself. So thank you for some of the questions.
Oh, you're welcome.